Okay, a long time ago, as part of maybe to help encourage an interest in coins, I was given a very large pile of English pennies. Very large. And I remember sorting them out by dates and so forth. But I just got a handful here that I thought I'd use to represent some different eras. This, of course, is Queen Victoria in her final image. Then after that comes King Edward. And then after that, King George V. And finally, there's King George VI. And then, much more recently, I acquired this proof set with Queen Elizabeth. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but they seem to have a pattern. And this is a deliberate pattern that English coins have, that with each passing king, they change directions which way they look. So Queen Victoria looks to the left. King Edward looks to the right. King George V looks to the fifth, looks to the left, and then suddenly we have a weird thing. King George VI also looks to the left. And then the pattern resumes again with Queen Elizabeth, who looks to the right. So what's going on here? Why is there a gap? Well, I used to have, without understanding that rule yet, I used to have this vague impression that there was another king in there somewhere. The invisible king. Yes. See, this particular coin of Queen Victoria is dated 1901. She died in 1901. But the coin continues to bear her image throughout 1901 as a commemoration, as it were, of the recently deceased queen, even though King Edward was, became king, was formally coronated king and everything like that. He wouldn't get his image on the coins until the next year, which is 1902. So, there he was on the throne from 1902, and as you see, he is now looking the other way. And he's on the throne clear up until 1910. Yes, just like as in Mary Poppins, tuppence a bag here. Here's your tuppence. 2 pennies. And, of course, it's grand to be an Englishman in 1910. King Edward's on the throne, and it's the age of men. Well, at least till about May of that year, when he, too, died. And, again, in commemoration of him, he remains on the coin for all of 1910. And I guess as a banker, that's kind of another piece of stability for temporarily anyway. But meanwhile, the next king has come into power, has been formally coronated, and he is, of course, I believe his son, King George V. So there he is. So King George V begins his reign. Let's see if I can pull that in 1911. There we go. So now that's when he starts his reign. And apparently he died in 1936, hence this is the last year that has King George V on here. Now, a weird thing kind of happened because this is where the other king comes in. Now, we come into 1937, we've already got a new king. Already, he's become king. He's been coronated king and so forth. And in 1937, you see, the coins at last begin appearing with his image. But it's in there, in between, that we have one other king that's almost forgotten and barely evidenced in England's coinage. Now, I guess we could go one step further. I don't have a penny here from 1952, which would be when King George VI died. And 1953 would be when Queen Elizabeth started appearing on the coinage. She came to power and was coronated in 1952. It's rather mind-boggling to think that when she was coronated in 1952, Ian Fleming had yet to sit down in his house on Golden Eye in the Bahamas and begin drafting what would become his very first James Bond book, Casino Royale. which is to say, James Bond, for his entire existence, has been under the Queen, Elizabeth II, for his entire existence. Since, of course, Elizabeth has the most extraordinary reign that still continues even to this day, as I say this in 2021. So, but there are some somewhat uncommon 1952 coins that do show George VI on them. And again, that's the same transition. And again, you see the same pattern. He was facing left, Queen Elizabeth faces to the right. So, who fit in between here? Who is this invisible king? Well, that would be King Edward VIII. This was Edward VII, so the next one would logically be Edward VIII. He was coronated, came to power in early 1936, since George V passed away in the first part of 1936, first couple of months or so. And then he reigned. But as we all know, he wanted to marry an American divorcee, and in order to be allowed to do that, he had to abdicate the throne. They had some moral standards for their royalty in those days, and that was the choice put to him. But it could be a fair question. What would have happened historically if he had remained king? Especially, let's say, through World War II, when he, as a noted Nazi sympathizer, would have been King of England. Perhaps things would have gone in a very different direction during World War II. One has to wonder what would have happened. But at any rate, before 1936 was over, he abdicated, and then his brother, who was George VI, became the new king, was coronated, and the very next year began appearing on the British coins, as you see here in this 1937 penny. So that's how that transition occurred. So there's another king in here. So the interesting thing was, well, would there be a penny with Edward VIII on it? Well, as you can see, if you understand the chronology of this, 1935 ends and 36 begins with George V still king. So he's supposed to be there with his image for all of 1936. Then he dies. They commemorate him throughout the year. Edward VIII comes in, and if he hadn't resigned so quickly, there would have been a year or more with his image on the coins. But since he abdicated and everything turned over to his brother, who was then coronated towards the very end of 1936, it was appropriate that 1937 would be the year that King George VI appears on there. So Edward VIII has a very brief existence. So has he no existence on British money at all? That's almost true, but with a few interesting exceptions. One is that they were experimenting with coins with Edward VIII on it, in preparation for making dies and things for putting his image on the coins for the next year. And so there are a teeny tiny handful of hyper rare pattern coins, all pretty much held by the London Museum, I should think, or nearly all, maybe a few oddball exceptions. They were at the same time coming out with a new threepence piece, threepence, if you will, that was had not only had his image, but had a new brass composition in a 12-sided shape, and they made a bunch of those to experiment with various coin-operated machines. So some of those may have gotten out and are known to collectors. But other than that, and maybe one or two other exceptions, his image would only be on these extremely rare patterns that, like I said, are almost entirely in the hands of the British museums and so forth. So that would be his only appearance on a coin. But as I said, there's a couple other exceptions. I'll start with the easier one first. This has no real official existence. It is merely a what do you call it? It was just a coin made. Canada. This was never really made for Canada. They make these sort of like a souvenir piece or something. I show this only because it gives us the nearest thing to a glimpse of what an Edward VIII coin would have looked like, what his image would have looked like, and so forth. You notice he is facing the same way as George V and George VI. Reason being, he decided to break that rule out of a bit of vanity on his own. He thought he would look better if the depiction of his image could show the part in his hair. So he flouted that tradition by having his image look in that direction. And so that way we could see the part and see just what a handsome guy that he is. But since officially he should have been facing the other way, I'll just face him the other way to kind of do that. Then, if we just pretend that he did, then the next king, George VI, returns to the normal succession and everything moves forward. So we just have this one person who's facing the wrong way, who kind of looked like he kind of discombobulated things, but not really, which works out okay for George VI, who also gets to display the part in his hair. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But as I said, this is just a souvenir thing stamped many years after the fact, just useful here only to kind of show what an Edward VIII coin might have looked like if they did exist. But officially they don't. But that's not totally true. Because the other thing that's really neat is that he does have a presence, not in any of the coins of England per se, but England still had a good many colonies. And in those colonies, some of them were already putting the new king on their coins. Now, as it happens, however, none of them put his image on it. But they did have his name on them, but they had no royal image. So let's start with one of these coins, West Africa. So this would be... Oops, that's not the one. What did I do with it? Goodness sakes. There we go. West Africa. British West Africa, 1936. Edward VIII is king. There he is, Edward VIII. And there he is, king and... imperial, independent emperor. 1/10 of a penny. So there he is, Edward VIII for British West Africa. That's 1/10 of a penny. This is the same king that you see here. Only now it's 1/2 penny, but it's still Edward VIII, and it's still British West Africa. Finally, here's British West Africa, 1936, and this one is 1 penny, Edward VIII. So there he is. So now, apparently that was West Africa. West Africa. Now, British East Africa, however, was also a colony of England. They have slightly different coins, but it amounts to the same thing. This is a 10 cents. And again, you see Edward VIII. There's the crown, but no picture of him. Just all the usual legends that go with that. Well, now, this is East Africa, 1936. That's 10 cents. And this is 5 cents. Edward VIII. 5 cents. And it shows the 5. East Africa, 1936. So that's pretty cool. Another place where it's fairly obvious, in Fiji. The halfpenny no longer existed, but the penny was still being made out of brass. There it is. It doesn't have a mint mark, but 1936. And again, You have Edward VIII, king and emperor. So there he is. He's king, he's emperor. No picture of him, but at least it shows that he has that. Finally, well, let's see. Well, one more category. Then there was British New Guinea. So, territory of New Guinea. 1 penny, 1936. And here, the only indication here is the letter E here. There being a great big fancy E, and R for Rex, and I'm not sure what the L stands for, but at any rate, E is for Edwards. So that's commemorating Edward. It would have been a G if it had been either George V or George VI. But being an E, that makes it for Edward, which would be in 1936, Edward VIII. Not a very strong indication, but at least his name is commemorated. Now, there's a number of various little mini-states within the nation of India, or what would become India as we know it today. Many of them were their own separate colonies. Now here, it's a lot tougher to discern his name, but it is there in the Arabic letters. So you have this sort of like a hamza, an aleph with a hamza. So it starts off the Deward, and so this, there's a wa, r, d. So the D is kind of unclear. This is supposed to be a D with a, okay, well, there's something else attached to it that shouldn't have been there. I don't know how that works, but anyway, and this little upside down V is actually the digit 8 for Edward VIII. You see the same thing on this other coin from another part of India. Same thing. You've got the aleph with the hamza. You've got, oh yeah, this is like a vowel symbol. D, R, D. And then the upside down V is again for the 8th. And if you look at that, there's a 1 and a 9. There's a 3. And then that looks like a 7. That's really the number 6 in Arabic numerals. So that's 1936. Let's see. Let's see if we can find 1936 on this as well. Yeah, 1936. Right here. 1, 9, and a 3. Boy, that's hard to make out. But let's see here. So if you look at that 3 sideways, you can just kind of yank, and there's that big long tail. That's a 3. And like I said, the normal thing that looks like a 7 in Arabic numerals is actually a 6. The 7 would be indicated by something that looks like a V pointing down, 8 by this thing like a V upside down pointing up, and then 9 is just a normal 9. So there we are. And there's a few other colonies or parts of India that have the same thing, including one district that even has a gold coin with his name on it. But at any rate, this is all I've got here to show for it. And that's about what I've got for the Invisible King, Edward VIII.